guard stationed at a secret government prison. This place sure gives you the creeps, doesn't it? I couldn't disagree with Sandy's assessment of the bizarre room we found ourselves in. The monitors only illuminated the area up until a certain point. However, we couldn't see any walls, which meant the place had to be bigger than what could be seen, either by a little or a lot. We couldn't know unless we decided to venture further into the darkness. Neither of us took that initiative, though, keeping it a mystery. Still, it didn't feel like anybody was in there with us, so we allowed ourselves to relax a bit. I took the first sitting shift, lying back in the chair and focusing on the monitor that I deemed most interesting at the moment. Wirehead versus Luce. Whom was I rooting for? None of them. Nevertheless, I was morbidly eager to see these two horrific titans square off. Among us guards, we created an unofficial tier system, ranking each respective void in terms of the estimated threat that they posed, in comparison to each other. The tiers went as such. Tornado, weakest tsunami. Hurricane, mid-earthquake. Asteroid, highest, imminent death. Yet the dugout they were also divided into subdivisions, high, low, mid, etc. With that said, Luce was around a high tornado while Wirehead was a mid-tsunami. A glaring difference between them, but not enough that would make it impossible for Luce to win. Want to make a bet? I asked Sandu, half-jokingly. He chuckled. You know my luck's cursed. But I guess if we don't make it out of here alive, then my debt's null anyway. Luce was more of a defensive combatant, so it wasn't surprising when Wirehead initiated the conflict. He twirled his bat around, still with remnants of guard flesh clinging onto it, in a near-mocking fashion at Luce. He was a delinquent, after all. Luce hardly reacted, of course. That's just the way he was. In response, he stepped forward, electricity flickering through his hands and up to his forearms. Wirehead followed suit, unleashing a big swing at Luce's head, which he managed to intercept with one of his forearms. Nevertheless, the wire still pierced his skin. Wirehead followed it up with a headbutt. This time, it connected with the flesh side of Luce's face, slicing him up rather gruesomely. But despite his seemingly grievous injuries, he remained unwavering. That was the thing about Luce. He was incapable of feeling any pain. As I said, his exact origins remained a mystery, but the one thing we knew about him for sure was the fact that he hailed from some kind of ancient clan residing in the Arctic Circle. In fact, he was the sole survivor of an incident that decimated his village, and he was hungry for revenge against the unknown force that did it. After taking the headbutt, Luce was now in striking range. He formed his fingers into an arrow shape and drove them into Wirehead's solar plexus, before electrocuting his insides. Wirehead quaked in pain as he swung his bat in a frenzied rage, just about demolishing Luce's ribcage. No reaction from him, though. Instead, he took his other hand and wrapped it around Wirehead's neck. Any normal person would have succumbed to Luce's electrical shocks after a few seconds. But of course, Wirehead was no normal person. Despite blood pouring out from a chest wound and the skin on his neck beginning to bubble, he picked Luce up by the torso and slammed him over the steel railing. He effing broke his back. Even without sound, the mental audio of a spine snapping reverberated throughout my mind. Unsurprisingly, Luce didn't bat an eye. Wirehead went in for the UN alive, tossing Luce's body onto the ground before smashing it until it resembled nothing more than a mess of bloody pulp and broken bones. But somehow, he was still alive. Among the gruesome pile, I could see an eye blink. Once Wirehead had exhausted himself from his relentless swinging, Luce took his chance. Using his one arm that hadn't been smashed to bits, he crawled over and grabbed Wirehead by the foot, before scaling himself up to his neck. Once there, he drilled his fist into Wirehead's forehead, utterly shredding his hand in the process. In the end, it was worth the sacrifice. He was able to electrocute Wirehead's brain, finally causing the behemoth to drop. So, I guess he won? Sandu said. I guess. I had my reservations about calling Luce's performance a victory. By the end of it, all of his limbs and his spine had been shattered, and not an inch of his body wasn't hosting a series of deep cuts. The good side of his face had also been chipped away to the skull, leaving only his eye and half his nose intact. And yet, he didn't move with a hint of desperation or concern, calmly crawling away from the scene using his one mangled hand. I could still see the current flowing through it as well, a telltale sign that he was ready to pick up another fight. Nice. Comeback victory, Sandu said. I don't see him making it far, though. Not as a tornado tier. Yeah, but we made all of that poop up. Not like it means anything. I responded. Truth be told, I was nearly rooting for Luce at the end there. Something about his resilience resonated with me, as bizarre as it may seem. I scanned the rest of the monitors. While Wirehead and Luce were squaring off, the undead Nazi had burnt Diaxic to a crisp. On another monitor, Morgie played around with a void corpse that I recognized as Death's Shadow. He chose his name. 3 down. I muttered to myself. Duck, we got a big one coming up. Sandu announced. I followed his eyes to a monitor near the bottom of the room. He was right. This one was going to be good. Standing at opposite sides of the kitchen were Trench, 6'3", 190 centimeters, 330 pounds, 150 kilograms and Senju, 5'10", 177 centimeters, 148 pounds, 67 kilograms. Trench was a silent entity dressed entirely in ancient-looking deep-sea diving gear, except for the head, which remained without a helmet. However, you couldn't get a glimpse of its face regardless. That was because his features were completely distorted, so much so that if you tried focusing on the details, all you were getting was a nasty migraine. On top of that, he was invisible in person. Let me explain. If he were standing right in front of you, you wouldn't be able to see him. The only way to get a glimpse of him was through secondary means, cameras, mirrors, etc., which made him all the more dangerous. As for how he unalived people, it was either by brute force using his monstrous strength or be his death aura, as we guards have dubbed it. Similar to Diaxic's zone, once you were in his close vicinity, you'd feel an astronomical amount of pressure and get crushed on the spot, comparable to what you'd feel standing at the bottom of the ocean. But that's only if Trench wills it. Sometimes, he'll turn the aura off and simply punch somebody's head off. For that reason, He was in the mid-hurricane tier. As for Senju, well, he was a psychotic, demon-possessed martial artist with supernatural levels of speed, strength, and agility. He trained in the Wraith style, or the technique beyond human comprehension, whatever the hell those were supposed to mean. When he gets serious, his eyes will roll into the back of his head and black veins will begin bulging out from underneath his skin. At that point, he'll be moving so fast that his motions become impossible to keep up with visually, and a single punch from him will be enough to completely vaporize a human head. But in all honesty, he's one of the least malicious voids out of the bunch. If you're weak, like his guards, he won't even spare you a glance, granted that you stay out of his way. The only thing that he's looking for is strong opponents to fight. But, when he can't find one, he starts to get antsy. And then problems emerge. We've pegged him at a low hurricane. Can Senju even see Trench? Sandu asked. I guess so, I responded. The question was worth asking, but I wouldn't have been surprised if Trench's aura/invisibility simply didn't work on him at all. That seemed to be the case since Senju decided to strike first. He rushed forward at an unfathomable speed, directing what must have been hundreds of strikes in succession at Trench. However, none of them fazed the obscure diver. I could see Senju's lips curling into a psychotic grin at the fact. He certainly found what he was looking for. The floor beneath him cracked as his eyes turned white and his grotesque veins began bulging. If we couldn't see his strikes before, it was beyond impossible now. He rushed forward, unleashing a maelstrom of lightning-like punches, elbows, and kicks against Trench. This went on for about 5 seconds before he was stopped in his tracks. Trench had grabbed him by the throat, still not looking any worse for wear in the process. I could see Senju mouth something to the effect of what the duck before he was tossed into a metal fridge. It certainly appeared as if Trench was too much of a tank for him to handle. Nevertheless, Senju got back up and cracked his shoulder into place while blood leaked from his mouth. And then he seemed to let out a shriek. Crazy ducker, I thought to myself. What the hell did it take for somebody to become like this? At that point, he'd seemingly given up on technique entirely. Instead, he grabbed a handful of kitchen knives and began chucking them at Trench. While none of them pierced the suit, one of them managed to stick in his distorted head, which evidently dealt some damage. Trench flinched, before taking the knife out and throwing it back at Senju, who in turn caught it effortlessly. At this point, he was howling in what I assumed was some kind of ducked-up sadomasochistic jubilation. He'd found a weak point. Senju rushed back at Trench, knife in hand, before slashing away at its face. Spurts of vicious, dark blue blood stained the kitchen floor, along with Senju's face. Soon enough, the knife snapped, and Trench threw a desperation punch at Senju's temple. He managed to block it with his forearm, although I could see his bones cracking from the impact. He leapt back as his arm hung limply to his side, dodging a follow-up haymaker. Throughout everything, a grin remained plastered on his face. His veins were bulging out so hard that I found it hard to believe they weren't going to completely burst altogether. With one arm, Senju lifted a metal table and swung it into the side of Trench's head, nearly taking it off in the process. He wasted no time, grabbing a large frying pan and pouncing at his incapacitated opponent, knocking them both over in the process. He then took a position atop Trench's body, furiously slamming the pan onto his face. Martial arts, hey, I could hear Sandu mutter. After what must have been 250 blows, the pan broke. On the ground, Trench's head had been obliterated no less than 50 strikes prior. Senju tossed the scrap metal aside and looked up at the ceiling, presumably screaming his lungs sore in sheer, combative delight. Well, looks like our tier system means duck all, I chuckled. Despite the morbid scene unfolding in front of us, Sandu shared a laugh with me. We were at the point where the absolute absurdity and danger of the situation were beginning to fade from our senses. Hell, I suppose we were enjoying ourselves, as ducked up as that may sound.